Thanks so much for joining me on the podcast here today. How are you?
Great, Jared. Thanks for having me.
Excited to have you. Let's dive right in. If you don't mind, give us a little bit about your background and then theory for those that maybe are just meeting you for the first time.
Sure. My name's Tomasz. Been a venture capitalist for 17 years. Worked with 8 unicorns and started a firm called Theory. We've raised about $700 million to invest in early stage data, AI, and Web3 businesses.
And for the companies that you invest in, like what is your, I know it can change, right? But what is your core criteria? What do you really look for? Specifically, let's just focus on the AI piece for this episode. But for those AI companies, what are you really looking for that stands out?
Yeah, we're typically looking for companies that have technical founders that can sell. That's really important. The AI wave is really about selling the change in the way that we work, which is really different than the last wave. It's almost category creation in at every step. And so a technical founder who can sell is really important. The other component that we're looking for are companies that exist at the intersection of 3 different circles. One is a lot of rote work, labor, really unattractive work, shortage in the labor market for whatever reason. There aren't enough graduates or people aren't attracted to the job. And then presence of many hiring managers who need to fill that seat now. And at the confluence of those 3, you have a hiring manager who's willing to accept a solution that's probably 75% accurate, which is probably where the state of the art is in AI. And they're willing to accept inaccuracies and work with vendors to improve that accuracy.
Do you think we're still, like, obviously a big fan of how quickly the technology has progressed, but I see this a lot, and I'm sure maybe you do too. I won't put words in your mouth, but like, we're also overstating in some cases where the technology is at today, right? Because like I use it when you look at for video editing and for image generation. I think we kind of make it seem like it's seamless. It still messes up the images. It's still
Totally.
So how do people looking at these technologies, like what's your advice for them when deciding, is this technology actually ready to go? Or maybe there's some technologies, right, that they're going to have to use and then it'll continue to get better, but they have to be an early adopter. So I guess what is your advice for those early adopters at companies exploring these enterprise solutions?
Yeah, I think you really need to be an early adopter because you need to figure out exactly where they fall. They all fall down. They're all big. I mean, putting together a PowerPoint presentation or image generation, you want an image with a particular word on it. Good luck, right? There are particular vendors who will do that, or if you're trying to create an outline or summarize a podcast, I'll use 2 different AI systems just to make sure it's comprehensive. Something like Claude or Gemini as an example. So they're kind of Swiss cheese, right? Where sometimes they work and sometimes you'll put in a query and you'll get a big dud. But in order to sort of take advantage of this or understand where it's going, you need to use it because you need to understand exactly where those holes are in that proverbial Swiss cheese. So I think set your expectations today that the products will not be phenomenal, but set your expectations that in 2 or 3 years, they will absolutely exceed our expectations. And so it's really hard to kind of step on an exponential curve halfway through and really know how to use the software. Ideally, if you can grow with it and have the patience, you'll be in a much better position to lead your whatever segment or part or totality of the business that you're responsible for.
I will say this too, for a lot of the companies that are still early, but people should adopt, right, and start using it. They're not pricing, like they are kind of discounting it right now for a lot of people as they're still making it better. So that's the good part, right? For these enterprises out there, in many cases, they're not paying what the price they'll pay when it is fully figured out, which is partly a benefit, right?
Totally. I mean, Sam Altman said there's a $20 price point for ChatGPT. There's a $200 price point. There's a $2,000 price point. And I think across all of those different price points, it's saying people are using it, customers are using it much more than a doc. And we're not making money, I think, at least on 2 of those price points. So that just tells you, you're right. Like the market is underpricing it today to drive that usage so that the software can improve.
Yeah. So like even more benefit to use it because you will more than likely get way more than what you're paying for,
Yeah. Great point.
from a usage standpoint. When you look at, which models really stand out to you at the current moment? It seemed like Google was so quiet for so long, and then it had a bunch of announcements with Gemini. Like, what really excites you about the models that exist today? And um, you know, do you think we'll have a clear cut winner? Like, and when might that happen?
Yeah, I think Google's transformation in the last 12 months in terms of ability to ship on their product is, I don't know if I've seen, maybe Satya's turnaround at Microsoft is on par, but it's a legendary accomplishment that the small models like the Gemma, the really small ones, or the Gemini Flash, I think they call it, and even the deep research on that, playing around with that one, that's pretty amazing. Like, I told it the other day, I was researching advertising, so I found a trade magazine. I said, summarize all the articles from the last 12 months about startups, and it gave me a list of all the startups with a description and URL, and it did it. And so I think Google's pace of innovation here is pretty remarkable. Anthropic, in my view, has carved out like the API part of the business, or at least a big chunk there. So if you're not the very, very largest software companies, but you're sort of mid-market, upper mid-market, they're thriving there. And then OpenAI, biggest brand out there, right? 300 million monthly actives, I think. So there's a lot of opportunity for innovation. Big push now is making the model smaller. You see, like DeepSeek launched V3, trained it for $6 million. I think we'll continue to see those kinds of efficiencies, because efficiency hasn't really been important. It's just been bigger and bigger models, and now these small models, particularly within enterprise, those performance is 2 orders of magnitude better cost and pretty similar performance, at least on some benchmarks. So I think you'll continue to see pretty significant deflation in that core part of the market. And then the big push is in 2 areas: multimodal. So I talked to a model and I wanted to produce an image or a video. It skips the whole text part. I think that'll be important because speech is the way that you and I, Jared, talk to each other. It's the way that you and I will talk to our computers. And then the other part about it is reasoning. So current models with the transformer architecture are not great at planning, because planning is a search problem. So we need a different kind of technology, reinforcement learning, to solve those search problems and create plans for long-term projects the way that an employee at a company might. And so I think you'll see a lot of big push there.
What are your thoughts on the state of agents today too? Because um, I think this kind of goes back to what you said earlier. Many of these agents, it'll still be a work in progress, and depending on which ones you decide to work with, right? Um, what are your thoughts on that? Is this an area that you're actively looking to invest in, or are you pausing on this space? Like, would love to hear.
Yeah. So agents is the GDP unlock that I think will be totally transformational for the US economy. I think we'll measure the impact in like whole percent of GDP. And so just to kind of put that in perspective, like the PC was a few basis points, 100x difference in productivity. So I think that's where it's going. We talked to, if you have a model that's like 75% accurate and you ask it to do 3 things, one right after the other, you end up with an output that's less than 50% accurate. So that's the problem that we're trying to solve. So design a slide, find an image, write the text, you end up with something that's 50% accurate. So at the output of each step, you need something that reduces that error somehow. There are lots of different techniques. So people are saying, let's use chain of thought. Maybe we can get the computer to produce a plan that's more accurate. Some people are running 3 models in parallel, just like Mechanical Turk, saying whatever the top 2 vote, let's take that. There's other architectures where you have one model that's proposing and you train another model that's a critic. It's the way that a journalist would work with an editor. And we're testing all these different techniques to determine which is the right architecture. It'll probably be some huge complex system that, depending on the kind of work that you're doing, will have a different kind of architecture. And I suspect 25 will see some pretty significant innovations there in terms of accuracy.
Doesn't creating a structure like that get expensive pretty quickly, right? If you're using all these different models. So this is still very much in the, like someone said this to me the other, like 2025 will still, like part of 2025 will be about where's the ROI, not just in, do you think that, or is that more 2026 is when we'll start to really focus in on ROI?
No. So we hear from buyers that AI cost is one of the single biggest barriers to adoption. Not in like, let me sign up for ChatGPT for $20, but let me call an API and push a new feature that's AI enabled, because the gross margin is really tough. So, and there needs to be two things to your point. One is the ROI for the end user, so they're willing to pay $2,000 a month for a ChatGPT subscription. So the accuracy needs to improve. And then the second is like, hey, this thing's really expensive. How do we reduce this cost? So you have seen like 1,000x deflation over the last 3 years in terms of AI inference. I think the move to small models would be really important, but the models themselves are a tiny fraction of the infrastructure. We have this huge information retrieval architecture around it, which is most companies basically building their own kind of version of Google to feed the model the right thing. And there's also significant cost. So it's kind of a race. Like the great part about the AI boom right now is there's a lot of interest. And so people are willing to fund what is economically kind of irrational at this point, because it's so expensive. The ROI is not there. The accuracy is not there. But because there's so much money, the accuracy is improving at this incredible rate. And because there's so much interest, people are willing to test it, provide data. So the accuracy is also improving. So it's a really nice combination of these two forces. So, to answer your question, I think 2025, we'll see some pretty significant increases in accuracy. And then 2026, I think, is probably where it percolates to the bottom line of the buyers of these kinds of software.
It's so interesting when you look at like all the different pieces of the puzzle though to make all this work. Like I was talking with an HVAC company
Mm-hmm.
that is focusing on these AI data centers, and they were explaining to me how actually for the like the cooling and ventilation, you have to set it up differently than your typical data center that are like just because of how they're structuring all the racks and everything. And it's super interesting to see like the little impacts across all these different spaces. Um, was there another time that you can think of that kind of aligned with such I mean, maybe outside of like the standard ones that we can kind of think back. Everyone always says, it's like like when the internet first launched and everything that was happening and all this. Is there any other instances or anything that you can compare it to?
I mean, I think the combination of technology and energy here is pretty different. I didn't realize this, but I was talking to a friend of mine who's big into energy. I was asking him, electric cars consume a lot of electricity. How much more electricity does a data center consume? And he said it's about 100x or 1,000x, right? Goldman just produced a survey that data centers consume 2 to 3% of energy today in the United States, but in the next 4 years, it consume 10 to 12. So, like that, I think that part is, I'm thinking about like the railroad. When we built the railroads, maybe the forestry industry took off because we needed to grow. We tried eucalyptus trees in California, and it didn't really end up working. But like the lumber industry grew really fast as a result of that. The steel processing industry, the Bessemer process, that's the one that feels, or at least, not that I lived through it, but like thinking back in history, feels like it hit a bunch of tangential sectors in the economy. I think the internet was just kind of concentrated in like digging up the ground, and maybe fiber optic companies, networking companies grew, but it didn't really impact a bunch of adjacencies. TV and radio, not really kind of the same thing. The Industrial Revolution, maybe like the spitting Ginny. I'm digging deep in my AP US history here, but like maybe there you had some kind of manufacturing line, but it feels maybe the railroads. I'd say the railroads is probably the one that feels the closest.
Yeah, because of the pure impact of multiple different industries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now all of a sudden we were able to send goods at a lower rate. Yeah, it was. That's actually a really good example. Um, it'll be interesting to see. And now all of a sudden we're starting to look towards different sources of energy, right? Nuclear has been the conversations around nuclear energy have been really renewed, and you're starting to see major pushes there. I mean, there was a big was it recently Constellation Energy just announced a big acquisition, right?
That's right.
It'll be interesting to see how everything plays out.
Yeah, reopening of 3
Um,
Mile Island, the NRC starting to issue. I mean, I was chatting with a friend of mine. He's asking me, like, what does the future look like for America? And I said, I think there's a dream out there that every small town has a modular nuclear reactor and a data center. And maybe that's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, interesting. And it'll just be, and to see what speed we get to that point, right, will be really interesting. Um, I think we've gotten a little spoiled in the sense of look at how quickly the technology has progressed over the last couple months, year, 2 years. It's pretty crazy. Do you think that speed will continue, or will there be some slowdown?
I think there was a narrative maybe a quarter ago that there was going to be a slowdown, but I don't see it. I think the deep research models, letting a machine learning model work for 10 minutes, the question I now face or I ask myself is, how do I spin up 5 of these things concurrently? And I'm finding myself needing to change the way that I work, which is now instead of looking at my work and figuring out when am I going to do it, the question is, how do I set up these prompts so that the result of 10 minutes worth of work is useful? There's some part of me that feels really guilty for using all of that energy because I know that there's a ton of GPUs crunching. I was transcribing a podcast on my laptop last week on an airplane, and I went through 3 podcasts and the battery was dead. So it's like you go through a lot of electricity really fast. But I think the pace of innovation here, just given the brilliance of the people, the amount of capital that's behind it, the strategic importance to nation states, it's the focus of just so much time and energy. It'll continue pretty fast.
But as a result of all that, computer battery goes down, your internal battery goes up,
Yeah,
right?
that's right. Take that
It's
shit all day long.
yeah, all of a sudden you're feeling pretty refreshed. Where I think if we can all get to a point where we can have our computers doing a lot of the tedious stuff that we don't enjoy, will reduce. There's so many other things that will end up having an impact, right? Can we reduce burnout across the board, and will people actually love what they're doing more? That would be a cool kind of impact. We'll see if that happens as well.
Yeah, I
Um,
love that view.
Last question for you as we wrap up here. There's still a lot of companies that are trying to wrap their heads around how should they be leveraging AI? How should they be adopting it? If you had to break down, and this doesn't have to be fully concrete, but like a 90-day plan for those companies that are still on the fence and what's their strategy going to be, um, what could that 90-day plan look like?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I would do is I would dole out subscriptions to one of the chatbots to everyone in the company, and then in the first week have everybody go through their calendar on a Sunday and figure out one task that they could automate with AI. And that first step is just education. Like what is everybody reads about AI? Kind of let's just test it, right? And then I think what you do is over the course of the second week is you say, okay, now do another one, now do another one, now do another one. And I would suspect that by the 4th or the 5th week, the kinds of, or maybe the scope of the automations that the leaders within the company are suggesting would be, let's automate 2/3 of our customer support function, or let's automate document ingestion, or let's start machine generated content, or let's start automating contract production for our sales. So I think it's really just about starting the educate. It's kind of like giving somebody an iPhone for the first time. It's really hard to imagine what the future looks like until you're swiping and typing and dictating to it. So I just start with education and let the natural creativity of people in the company blossom.
I love it. Actually, there is one more thing I wanted to ask you,
Sure.
and it's about what are you thinking of this Human X conference that's coming up?
I'm stoked to be there. Thrilled to be a very small part of it. I think the kinds of conversations and the level of the sophistication of the people are unlike any conference I think I'll attend in 25. So thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It should be a great event. The speakers and just the content. I can't think of many first year events that were able to get to the point that this event has. So it'll be really exciting. Look forward to seeing you there. And thanks again for joining us on the podcast here today.
Have a wonderful day. Thanks for the time, Jared.